In this video I'm making a prediction of how fast DGX Station and DGX Spark will be, and specifically I'm predicting very high token per second rates for DGX Station for smaller models, but also a rapid drop the larger the model gets. In this video I will give you a bit of background on which model this prediction is based. We'll look at some real data and hopefully you will get something out of it. So stay tuned until the end, and if you like to see more of these videos, consider subscribing. First, let's get started with some data and an overview of this data and some charts which correspond to this data. This data in particular is based on this fantastic article by Alan Witt from Hardware Corner. Here's the chart which he has generated. In this chart you see the model size in parameters charted across the speed in tokens per second. As you see, there is a drop. The bigger the model gets, the slower the tokens per second rate is. The reason for this is that the model needs to be loaded for each token. So one from memory into the GPU in order to process it. And that's why also memory speed is a very important factor. In fact, they say that typically the LLM performance in tokens per second for the prompt generation phase will be limited by the bandwidth speed you have. We'll see how that plays out. In this chart, I've taken a subset of the data and calculated an additional or some additional parameters. So first of all, we get the total RAM, which the model of a GPU or the Mac has. This total RAM determines the total size of the model we can load. Depending on the quantization, briefly, quantization is a possibility to express the model in lower precision, thereby getting worse performance, but actually reducing the model sometimes by several times the size it actually is. So for example, in float 16, so this could be the original model, the model size is 13.4 gigabytes. If we do a quant 8, so integer 8 quantization, we are at 7.1 gigabyte. A quant 4 of the same model might be 3.8 gigabyte in memory size and thereby fit more comfortably. Specifically, if we're looking at larger models, let's say a 65 billion model in quant 4, that will be 36.8 gigabyte, so it might fit into a 48 gigabyte GPU. Yes, indeed, there are some NVIDIA GPUs which have 48 gigabytes of RAM. In particular, this RTX A6000 or RTX 6000 Ada generation, which is the more high-end offering of which NVIDIA has for professional workstations. Then we have the token rate. In this data, this was determined empirically by actually measuring this particular model on this particular GPU. Then we have a calculated value called memory speed and max theoretical token per second. I calculate this, as you can see, by actually taking the bandwidth and dividing it by the model size. Basically, I determine how fast the memory bandwidth, or how often per second the memory bandwidth is able to transmit the full memory size. Now, this is a first approximation of the actual way this is processed, but actually it's a good approximation. What on top, you have to keep in mind that on top actually we have to load additional tokens, additional stuff from memory. For example, we have to load the KV cache, which holds vectors and stuff, so we don't have to compute in a quadratic fashion but can compute in a linear fashion, so that the longer the sequence gets, we can still continue processing that in a decent way. So then the other value I add is the percentage of real versus max. So I calculate the relationship between the measured tokens and the theoretically maximum possible tokens. An interesting bit is to chart this data. So if we chart the values of the theoretical bandwidth versus the achieved bandwidth in tokens per second, we see that this roughly hits a wall at 0.85 or 85%. So the maximum really decent GPUs or powerful GPUs achieve is at 85%. And we can drop pretty significantly to below 35% on utilization. Now, specifically on the Mac, we have this type of curve here. And on the GPUs from NVIDIA, we have a somewhat better situation between, let's say, 0.5 roughly, again to 0.85, depending on the model size and type. So what I can take away from that is that we are able to set a percentage, an upper percentage of roughly 85% and a lower percentage of 45 to 30%, between which we probably should see the tokens being generated. So let's have a look at the data for DGX Spark now. So DGX Spark has the following specifications. It has 1000 AI tops. Now, this is kind of a marketing value, so you have to take it with a grain of salt, and it's also not comparable to the other tops which we had listed in the previous table. So I decided to instead put a question mark of how high the performance will actually be. But we have 128 gigabytes of memory and a memory bandwidth of 273 gigabytes per second. Now, depending on the model size, I can calculate the maximum theoretical token per second, which, as you see, with a 273 gigabyte per second bandwidth will drop to, so the maximum actually achievable tokens would be 3.64 on distilled LLAMA model of DeepSeek R1 with in Quant 8. If we then take these values and look at 30 to 80% of them, we will get at roughly, for such big models, which still fit into the RAM of the DGX Spark, we will get a prediction of between 1 token per second to a maximum of 2.9 token per second, which is not too bad. So actually, for a different project, I'm going to release this video on a different channel. I've calculated that roughly for human speech speed, we approximately need between 3 to 5 tokens per second. So this would be able to generate spoken output for these larger models, for 30B floating point 16, or for the DeepSeek R1, for the distilled LLAMA, would be able to generate roughly, if we, of course, if we hit the higher tokens per second prediction value versus the lower ones, but probably it's going to be somewhere in the middle. So it will be a slow speaking model. Another point you should note before some people raise it in the comments is that DeepSeek R1 is a thinking model, so your actual experience with the way it generates will be slower because it will first generate the thinking part, which may be hidden, and then it will start generating the actual tokens. And also, speaking about that, there's 2 phases generally. So there's one phase where we start out to process the prompt, and this phase is actually limited by the compute. So if DGX Spark has a lot of compute and it's very powerful, it will be able to start generating faster. But the prompt generation speed most likely will be limited by memory, because again, in our model, a simplified model of what actually happens, but a good enough model to do predictions, we have to, for every token, we have to load the model or run the entire model once through the actual GPU, and so it has to be transmitted once for every single token which we generate. It has to be transmitted once through the RAM. Okay, so let's have a look at what that means in a chart. So my prediction is that we will be somewhere between these two min and max values for the tokens per second, depending on the model size. Note, this is not the model size in parameters, but this is actually the model size in gigabytes. So in order to understand where you are in the speed, you basically take the model. Let's say you have a 70 billion parameters model and you do quant 8 on it, then you would be at roughly 70 gigabytes of size. If you do a quant 4 on it, you would be at roughly 35, so you would be somewhere here. And for a floating point 16 with 140 gigabytes, you would be out of luck because it would not fit into the RAM on DGX Spark, which is 128 gigabytes. Now let's go into DGX Station. First, let's have a look at the chart. Now, these are like not literally off the chart, but they are fantastic values for small models. It's fantastic performance, you know, roughly 1000 tokens per second. And still we get, for even very large models, we get quite decent performance over 10 tokens per second. The reason, of course, is that DGX Station has a lot of memory bandwidth. DGX Station has 8 terabytes per second bandwidth for the HBM3E memory, 288 gigabytes. By the way, I'm going to create another video about what this HBM3E is and why it actually makes DGX Station a quite expensive device. In my understanding, it should be somewhere between 150,000 to 250,000, not for the memory, but for the entire device. I'm going to create a separate video for it. If you're curious about that and to know why I predict that value, I'll give some explanations. Subscribe to my channel. Note there's two types of memory on the DGX Station, which will become important in the predictions for even larger models. There's a GPU memory, which is HBM3E with 200 and up to 288 gigabytes of it, which has a really high speed at 8 terabytes per second. And then we have LPDDR5X up to 496 gigabytes of memory in this case. And it has a bandwidth of up to 396 gigabytes per second. NVLink C2C actually allows this memory to be also used by the GPU by copying it through this chip-to-chip link, which has 900 gigabytes per second of speed, which is actually faster than the LPDDR5X, meaning this is the value which will constrain us at high model sizes. So let's go into this chart again. And I've added a couple of different models here. Specifically, I've added LLAMA 70B with floating point 16, which is too big to fit into DGX Spark, but it will fit perfectly into DGX Station at 141.12 gigabytes. It will probably head something between 17 to 45 tokens per second, so it will be decently fast. Then if we look at the full DeepSeek model, so there's of course the distilled models with LLAMA and Qwen, and if you look at actually the full DeepSeek models, R1, Q2 with K and XS, this is a quantization, like a very, very low quantization, at a model size of 221.25 gigabytes, I predict that this should be still decently fast at maybe roughly 10.85 token per second. Again, the 30% is a conservative value. I also reduced these on the really big models because I estimate that possibly it might run into some compute, hit some compute walls, or it might be more complex or something. But I'm pretty certain that we should see some performance between, let's say, roughly 11 and 25, 20, 30 tokens per second on this. Now, this model still fits into the VRAM on the DGX station. There's one model which has a bit of a higher quant. For example, this quant 2K with 244, or this quant 2KL with 244.25, which you might think will still fit into these 288 gigabytes, but I think that because of a KV cache and also other things, other overhead which needs to fit into the GPU RAM, that actually it might not be possible to fit it at sufficient speeds. So then parts of the model will have to be loaded from the CPU RAM, which will be slower. And that's what we're going to look at now. So if you actually hit the CPU RAM, the bandwidth goes down to 396. Now, I haven't calculated these values here directly as I have calculated the others, because from my assumption is that actually a lot of the model will be still in the fast GPU RAM, and just part of it will live in the slower CPU RAM. And then the constraint will be given by the CPU RAM, so we just calculate this in a different way and just look at how much we actually have to load from this small RAM. So the token speed goes down significantly because we are now about 20 times slower on this RAM, and this is expressed in the token speed. On this DeepSeek Q8, I just included it as a theoretical value because, again, I don't believe it will fit into the memory. There's additional overhead which needs to be put into the RAM, so it will not be able to run. But just theoretically, if it could be loaded fully into the memory and you could operate it, you would hit less than 1 token per second at the maximum theoretical speed limit. So it would not run very fast. Again, for the predictions here, as soon as we hit the video, as soon as we have to hit the CPU RAM, we go quite slow. So we're at between 1 to 2 tokens per second. Let's say I've calculated the bandwidth limiting part and made an assumption that we're actually able to serve a lot of memory from the fast RAM and just need to load the slower values over the and the link, the NVLink C2C. So let's have a look at the chart again. Basically, you're golden as long as your model stays small enough to be loaded into the video RAM, into the GPU RAM entirely. There you can hit really decent rates. I predict 30 tokens per second, so you'll be happy to achieve those. If you will start hitting system RAM, the main system RAM, you'll go down to very slow values. It might still be useful for certain applications and scenario types. For example, it might potentially even be useful for the mixture of experts model type. This is an interesting bit, and this also explains some of these parts here where the speed goes up. I'm just going to talk about this in a second. But before I do, another way you could actually improve the performance and the ability to load up DeepSeek R1 fully with a good quant, so you would be able to have a very good performance on it, is to actually buy several DGX stations. I don't think DGX Spark or clustering DGX Sparks would be useful here. I really think several DGX stations is the way to go, probably something like 4 DGX stations, which would give you a total of about 1.1 terabyte of RAM. Would be good to be able to operate DeepSeek R1. Possibly even 3 might be enough. So for those wondering why we have these dips here as well, and on the other hand these rises, and also in the Also these peaks here in the original data. This is due to a mixture of experts model. And this is quite interesting, so that's what I'm going to explain now. So if you look at this, we have the mixture of experts here. And in this case, the model is quite big, but actually there's a part of the model which selects just like 2 out of 8 experts each time. So the model is fully loaded into the RAM, but in order to create the tokens, only a 4th part of it needs to be processed. That improves token generation for the total size compared to the total size of the model significantly. So if you look at it, a comparable model would be a 30 billion model with Quant 8, and it is much slower than the actual or the mixture of experts model. On the other hand, if we compare the percentage of the achievable tokens per second, if constrained just by memory speed, versus the actually achieved percentage, on the mixture of experts model, this drops significantly. So we achieve only 52% of the actually achievable tokens on the theoretical memory speed for this type of model memory size. So it's an interesting observation in addition. So what do you think? Will DGX Station be able to achieve the values which I have predicted? Will DGX Spark be able to achieve these values? And do you think it's worthwhile purchasing DGX Spark? Do you think my prediction of $150,000 to $250,000 makes this worth a purchase from your side? Please leave your comments below. And if you're curious why I think that the DGX Station will be between $150,000 to $250,000, subscribe to the channel and I'll drop a video on that soon. Have a great day and thanks for watching.